NASA is hiding a shocking discovery. An alien showed me what they don't dare to reveal. And the moment I saw it, I understood why they buried it beneath miles of concrete and silence. It wasn't a threat, or a weapon, or anything humanity could fight. It was a truth so impossible, so ancient, that it could rewrite everything we believe about who we are. When the chamber lit up and that being stepped through the light, I realized NASA had been preparing for the wrong thing all along. Because what's coming isn't an invasion, it's a remembering. Before we begin, like this video, share it with someone who still believes we're alone, and subscribe so you never miss what they never meant for you to hear. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Now, let's return to the night everything began. The moment the chamber door sealed behind Donovan, he sensed something was terribly wrong. The air felt too still, too heavy, as if the entire room were holding its breath. Then the alarms erupted shrill, rising, frantic. Red lights strobed across the reinforced walls, flashing over terrified scientists, slamming their hands against consoles that no longer responded. Donovan had seen classified incidents before, but nothing like this. A hum rose from the center of the chamber, low at first, then building until it vibrated through his bones. The artifact on the pedestal, the one NASA had hidden for more than 4 decades, began to glow from within. Not with electricity, not with heat, with something alive. The chamber lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. Darkness swallowed everything except the artifact's growing radiance, which expanded like a sphere of molten gold. Donovan stood frozen, watching the air distort around it, bending like liquid heat on desert asphalt. The temperature dropped sharply, frosting over the steel railings, even as the object burned brighter. He heard one of the scientists shouting through the intercom, but the words dissolved into static. Every electronic system in the complex had collapsed at once. This was not a malfunction. It felt intentional. The golden light erupted outward, filling the room in a silent flash that pierced Donovan's mind more than his eyes. He blinked through the haze, heart pounding, as a shape formed within the brilliance, a silhouette too tall, too slender, too fluid to belong to anything human. The light peeled away from it like shedding layers of a star, revealing a being of translucent form, its body shimmering like carved crystal filled with moving auroras. The figure stepped forward with a grace that did not disturb the floor, as if gravity itself struggled to understand it. Donovan tried to move, but his muscles refused. The being lifted its head, and for the first time Donovan realized it was looking directly at him. Not around him, not through him, at him. The chamber around them seemed to fall silent, as though time had hesitated. Then a voice entered Donovan's mind, not spoken, not heard, but known. A message carried on something older than language itself. You were not supposed to find this. But now, you must know the truth. A chill crawled down Donovan's spine. He felt utterly exposed, as if the being Aurith were scanning every memory he had ever buried. Scientists outside scrambled, trying to force open emergency locks, but nothing responded. The systems were not failing. They were being held, controlled. Donovan understood that, instinctively. The golden aura dimmed around Aurith, revealing eyes that did not glow, but absorbed light, like wells into another world. Donovan suddenly felt the undeniable weight of selection. Aurith had not merely appeared. He had chosen. And Donovan realized something that squeezed his lungs with fear. NASA had not stumbled onto a secret. They had awakened one. The call came long after midnight, at an hour when even the most troubled corners of Donovan's mind usually surrendered to sleep. His phone vibrated once. No ringtone, no alert, just a coded pulse that only one organization still used. For a moment he stared at the screen, half expecting it to be some residual glitch from his years of classified work. But when the encryption keys unfolded across the display in patterns he had not seen in almost 10 years, a cold certainty settled over him. Someone from his past was reaching out, and not with good news. The message was brief, only 4 words, yet heavy enough to pull him from bed before he even realized he was standing. "It is happening again. We need you now." There was no name, but he did not need one. He recognized the signature of the sender. Not in the letters, but in the way the code was structured. Only one person would have used that pattern, a former colleague who had sworn never to contact him unless the situation was truly beyond control. Donovan stood in the silent shadow of his apartment, feeling the weight of a past he had tried relentlessly to bury, clawing its way back into the present. He moved quickly, not out of panic, but because some distant instinct whispered that time was already running thin. As he packed a small case, he could not stop replaying the final project he had worked on before leaving NASA, the one that had convinced him to walk away from a career he once believed would define his entire life. That project had involved irregular readings, unexplained energy surges, and an artifact no one fully understood. They had shut it down, sealed it away, and sworn it would never be touched again. For years, Donovan forced himself to believe that decision had been enough. Outside, the streets were silent, under a pale halo of streetlights. Donovan drove without turning on the radio, letting the emptiness of the highway absorb his thoughts. The deeper he traveled into the night, the more he felt a strange pressure building in the air. Like an approaching storm he could sense but not see. Something about this summons felt wrong, as if the message was not simply calling him back to duty but drawing him towards something waiting in the dark. By the time he reached the restricted access road leading to the facility, a quiet dread had woven itself into his breathing. The night seemed too still, the sky too clear, as though the world were bracing for something it could not name. Donovan parked, stepped out, and looked at the building he once knew intimately. It felt different now, emptier, yet charged with an unseen tension. With each step toward the entrance, one unsettling truth pressed harder against his mind. If they were calling him back after nearly a decade, if they were invoking that old code, then whatever had begun back then had not ended. It had only been sleeping, waiting for the moment to awaken again. The elevator descended deeper than Donovan remembered any elevator in the facility ever going. Dropping past the familiar floors, past the laboratories he once walked through daily, past every level that should have existed, the digital indicator displayed nothing but a blank screen, as if the system refused to acknowledge where it was taking him. A silent escort stood beside him, offering no explanation, no glance, not even the slightest indication of human curiosity. The air grew colder the farther they traveled, densifying with a metallic taste that suggested recycled atmosphere and sealed off spaces never touched by sunlight. When the doors finally opened, Donovan stepped into a corridor unlike any part of NASA he had ever been cleared to see. The lighting was dim, recessed into narrow strips that cast long, skeletal shadows across the polished floors. The walls were smooth, seamless, built from an alloy he could not immediately identify. There were no signs, no posted warnings, no room numbers, only a sense of depth that stretched far beyond the architectural blueprints he once studied. It felt less like a workplace and more like a hidden artery of something far older than the space agency itself. The escort led him forward without a word. As Donovan walked, his footsteps echoed in a low, hollow rhythm that suggested the corridor extended farther underground than he could comprehend. He passed a steel door thicker than any blast vault he had ever encountered. Another hallway branched off and disappeared around a bend, marked only by a pattern of 3 small lights set into the wall in a sequence he did not recognize. Everything in this place seemed guided by a logic stripped of any human-friendly design. This was not a facility meant for ordinary personnel. This was a place built to be forgotten. Donovan tried to steady his breathing as a faint vibration traveled through the floor, like a distant generator or something deeper, pulsing with a rhythm that did not feel mechanical. It reminded him disturbingly of a heartbeat. His escort paused at a biometric scanner more advanced than anything he had ever seen. The device hummed, projected a lattice of faint lines across Donovan's face, and then unlocked with a quiet click. No code was entered. No badge was scanned. It was as if the system already knew he was coming. Beyond the door lay a chamber lined with archival cylinders, each one containing sealed containers marked with symbols not from any known alphabet. A faint luminescence drifted around the edges of the room, giving the space an almost subterranean glow. Donovan felt a subtle tremor in the air, a sense of energy curling just outside perception, as though something in the deeper levels was stirring. He realized then that these corridors were not newly built. They felt older, constructed during an era when exploration meant secrecy, when discoveries were buried before they could reshape the world. Apollo-era remnants, expanded quietly, erased deliberately, maintained by teams sworn to silence. As he was guided further down the narrow passage, Donovan sensed that each step was pulling him away from the world he once knew and into a layer of reality NASA had spent generations hiding. A truth he had not been meant to see, yet one that had clearly been waiting for him. Whatever they had awakened, whatever had called him back, it was somewhere in the depths below. And it was no longer sleeping. The chamber opened with a slow, mechanical sigh, as though the room itself were reluctant to reveal what it held. Donovan stepped inside, and for a moment his breath stilled in his chest. The space was circular, silent, and colder than any of the corridors above. Thin lines of pale light ran along the floor in geometric patterns he did not recognize, converging toward the center of the room where the artifact rested. He had prepared himself for something technological, maybe even extraterrestrial, but nothing could have readied his senses for the object before him. It hovered an inch above its containment pedestal, rotating so slowly that it seemed to float through its own shadow. The metallic surface shimmered with a color he could not name, neither silver nor gold, but something that shifted between both, like liquid metal stirred beneath moonlight. Etched across its surface were patterns that seemed carved yet alive, twisting softly in shapes that changed whenever he tried to focus on them. They did not move like symbols or writing. They moved like thoughts. Donovan felt a pulsing sensation roll through the air, faint at first, then stronger, syncing oddly with the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat. Every time he took a step closer, the pulse deepened, adjusting, almost reacting to him. A sudden awareness settled over him, a sensation that the artifact was not simply radiating energy, it was listening. The realization made the tiny hairs on his arms rise. This was not a relic. It was a presence. He studied the pedestal and noticed it was not connected to any power source. No cables, no supports. The containment chamber did nothing to influence the artifact's behavior. It existed entirely independent of its surroundings, sustained by something that felt more like intention than energy. Its surface brightened briefly, as if acknowledging his attention. The patterns tightened, spiraled, then expanded again into configurations he instinctively sensed were meaningful, though his mind could not yet translate what they were trying to communicate. He stepped closer still, compelled by a pull he could not explain. The room seemed to tilt in a way that defied physics, as though space itself bent slightly around the artifact. He felt pressure behind his eyes, sharp but not painful, more like a suggestion nudging at the edges of his mind. The pulse synchronized with his breath now, beating gently, insistently, urging him to understand something he had not yet grasped. For a moment Donovan thought he heard a faint whisper, but it was not a sound. It was a presence brushing lightly against his thoughts, testing him, searching for recognition. The artifact's surface darkened, then illuminated again in a rippling pattern that resembled a heartbeat amplified through metal. A living rhythm, a living memory. It was impossible, yet the truth pressed against him like a weight. He realized then that this object had not been built. It had been born, and whatever intelligence resided within it now knew he was here. It sensed him, studied him, and responded with a pulse that felt almost like a greeting. Donovan stood in the dim half-light of the chamber, aware that this was only the first layer of a truth he was never meant to uncover. The artifact was waiting, watching, and the deeper he looked, the more certain he became that it had crossed impossible distances, not to be discovered, but to awaken. The deeper Donovan ventured into the underground complex, the more he sensed an undercurrent of unease in the air, a tension that clung to every surface like static waiting to discharge. When he entered the next chamber, a wide observation room lined with screens and decades-old research equipment, he felt as though he were stepping into the aftermath of a long and futile war. Tables were cluttered with abandoned notes, stacks of printouts, and faded diagrams that mapped the artifact from every conceivable angle. Yet, despite all the data, an unmistakable atmosphere of defeat permeated the space. The scientists ushered Donovan toward a central console, its surface covered with symbols that looked like equations but spiraled into patterns unrelated to any known mathematical system. The screens behind him flickered with archived footage spanning more than 40 years. Each recording displayed a different approach, a new strategy, a changing team of experts who had all tried, failed, and quietly disappeared from the project. It became clear that the artifact had not been a short-term curiosity. It had been an obsession, one that consumed everyone who attempted to unravel it. Donovan studied the first recording closely. A young researcher spoke in excited, hurried tones about quantum decryption, a process intended to identify data hidden in subatomic fluctuations. The artifact did not react. In another clip, an early artificial intelligence attempted to model the shifting surface patterns. The program eventually crashed, its algorithms looping endlessly before collapsing under an unsolvable contradiction. Even the most sophisticated AI from recent years produced the same result, an elegant failure that ended in silence. He moved on to another station, where thick binders documented nuclear resonance experiments. The researchers had attempted to read the artifact the same way geologists read planets, by sending vibrations through it and analyzing the echoes. Yet every test returned the same anomaly. The artifact absorbed the signals entirely, giving no measurable output. It behaved less like an object of metal and more like a void, swallowing everything directed at it. Another screen showed an electromagnetic chamber pulsing with a spectrum of frequencies that could make atoms resonate. The artifact remained unaffected. Radiation detectors lingered near zero. Temperature sensors recorded no change. Each attempt resembled a ritual repeated endlessly by those desperate for a response that never came. The object simply existed. Silent, untouchable, watchful. Donovan flipped through log entries from researchers who once believed they were close to a breakthrough. Their handwriting shifted from confident to frantic, then to a kind of quiet resignation. One entry caught his attention. It described a moment when the lead scientist believed the artifact had almost reacted, not through measurable energy, but through a shift in the room's atmosphere that only the human senses detected. The next page dismissed the sensation as psychogenic, a trick of the mind, stress-induced interpretation. But Donovan paused. That description mirrored exactly what he had felt in the chamber, an awareness brushing lightly at the edges of his perception, as though the artifact were choosing when and whom to acknowledge. He looked around the room at the silent machines, the failed experiments, the ghostly remnants of ambition and fear. Decades of attempts, countless minds, and an entire hidden wing of NASA had devoted themselves to unlocking a message that refused to be heard. Yet the evidence was unmistakable. The artifact had never been unresponsive. It had simply chosen not to speak. Not until now. The chamber felt different the moment Donovan crossed its threshold again, as though the air itself had shifted in anticipation. A faint vibration ran through the floor, too subtle for the sensors yet undeniable to his senses, like a quiet breath drawn in by something waiting to be awakened. The artifact hovered at the center of the room exactly as before, but now its surface appeared darker. The shifting pattern slowed to a lazy drift, almost as if it were conserving energy. Donovan sensed something watching him from within that metallic stillness, an attention that had not been present for any of the countless scientists who had stood in this room before him. As he took his first step forward, the temperature dropped sharply, and the lights flickered in a rhythmic pulse that aligned perfectly with the beat beneath his ribs. The artifact's surface shimmered once, like the glint of light on rippling water, then settled. Donovan hesitated, aware of the countless warnings etched into the decades of failed research logs. But as he drew closer, the vibration in the chamber deepened, no longer faint but resonant, threading through his bones like a sound he felt rather than heard. The moment he took another step, everything changed. The artifact brightened with sudden intensity, flooding the chamber with a glare that carved Donovan's silhouette into the floor. The floating object spun rapidly, shedding thin ribbons of luminous metal that dissolved into the air before they touched anything. A wave of energy rippled outward, not violent but impossibly controlled, passing through every wall, every sensor, every fiber of the facility. The lights outside the chamber flickered in cascading waves as systems struggled to interpret the sudden influx of anomalous readings. Donovan stood frozen as the artifact expanded, its edges distorting like a reflection in disturbed water. It stretched into the air, unfolding itself layer by layer, revealing a depth that defied the confines of physical space. What emerged was not a projection, nor a hologram, nor any known form of interface. It resembled a dimensional aperture, a window into a geometry that twisted in shapes his mind had no words for. Color flowed through it in impossible gradients, shifting from metallic hues to deep cosmic shades that hinted at distances no instrument could ever measure. What startled the scientists watching behind the observation glass was not the activation itself, but the fact that the artifact responded only to Donovan. Every sensor confirmed it. Every algorithm cross-checked it. His proximity alone triggered a reaction that 4 decades of experimentation had failed to achieve. The chamber's atmosphere trembled lightly as the interface expanded further, forming intricate lines of light that spiraled outward and wrapped around him like a celestial map, each line pulsing in sync with his heartbeat. Donovan felt a pressure behind his eyes, not painful, but insistent, as if the artifact were sifting through layers of his consciousness. The patterns shifted around him, forming a shape that hovered just beyond comprehension. For a fleeting moment, he sensed a presence, not physical but aware, brushing lightly against his thoughts. The sensation was neither hostile nor welcoming. It felt like recognition. The chamber walls dimmed until only the artifact's luminous structure illuminated the space. Instruments failed one by one, unable to process what they were recording. Outside, technicians scrambled to reroute power, but nothing could interrupt the phenomenon. The artifact had established a link, and Donovan was its point of focus. The interface narrowed, forming a sweeping arc of light that curved toward him like an invitation. A faint hum resonated through the air, aligning with his pulse, drawing him irresistibly closer. There was no doubt now this object had not been waiting for NASA. It had been waiting for him, and with his presence, it had finally chosen to wake. The chamber dissolved into brilliance the moment the interface reached its full expansion. Light pooled through the air in slow, fluid waves, not radiating outward as normal illumination would, but folding and curling like something alive, guided by a logic older than physics. Donovan felt the pressure behind his eyes intensify, a soft but undeniable pull that urged his attention toward the center of the expanding vortex. The artifact's metallic form was now barely visible, eclipsed by a blooming field of shifting geometry that pulsed in deliberate rhythm. Then the light changed. It gathered inward, condensing into a vertical column, narrowing, sharpening, sculpting itself into the outline of a figure far too tall and too slender to be human. The glow dimmed from blinding gold to a softer radiance, revealing the translucent contours of a being whose form seemed made of layered starlight and refracted auroras. It did not appear as flesh, nor hologram, nor machine. It appeared as presence, as intention shaped into form. A subtle resonance vibrated through the room, synchronizing once again with Donovan's heartbeat. The being lifted its head slowly, almost curiously, and the chamber's temperature dropped in response, as though the atmosphere itself recognized an intelligence far exceeding anything Earth had ever conceived. Donovan felt his breath tighten, not from fear, but from an overwhelming sense of recognition, not of the face or the form, but of the mind touching his. A voice entered him, not through ears, not through vibration, but directly into thought. It was clear and sharp, layered with tones that had no earthly equivalent, yet carried a depth of familiarity that unsettled him. He could not tell if the voice belonged to a single consciousness or many speaking in perfect unison. But one name reverberated through the echo, like a signature burned into the air. Oreth. The being's presence pressed gently against Donovan's thoughts, not invasive, but aware. It sifted through the edges of his memory the way one might test the integrity of ancient stone, searching not for answers but for resonance. The chamber darkened around them, the lights flickering into silence, as though every machine recognized that communication was no longer needed. Something far older had taken its place. The luminous patterns flowing through Oreth's form shifted, almost breathing. Donovan sensed no hostility, yet something about the being's presence felt impossibly vast, as if a star were attempting to compress itself into the shape of a single silhouette. The closer Oreth's projected consciousness came, the more Donovan felt a strange familiarity tug at him, a memory he did not recall making, a recognition he could not logically explain. It was as though Oreth did not simply know him, he remembered him. The voice returned, settling deeper now, weaving into layers of thought he did not know were accessible. The words were not spoken, yet their meaning arrived fully formed, effortless, impossible to misinterpret. The message did not carry urgency or threat, it carried inevitability. Oreth's consciousness pulsed once more, illuminating the chamber in a soft radiance that made the metallic walls seem to tremble. The patterns of light around the being shifted into an alignment that felt unmistakably purposeful, like a door opening in a place beyond physical space. Donovan realized with a cold clarity that the being was not merely appearing. It had been waiting for the exact moment when someone whose mind could receive its message stepped close enough. Oreth's presence leaned into his thoughts, and in that instant, Donovan understood something that made the entire world feel suddenly smaller. The artifact had never been a device. It was a beacon, and Oreth was the intelligence it had been calling across dimensions, answering through consciousness rather than space. The connection had finally been made, and it had been made through him. The chamber had always been designed to feel unbreakable, a sanctuary of reinforced metal and impenetrable systems meant to contain the unknown. But the moment Oreth's presence fully settled into the room, that illusion shattered. The hum of the facility's power grid faltered, dropping into a low, trembling drone that rippled through the floor like a warning pulse. Somewhere beyond the glass, someone shouted an order, followed by the rapid clatter of keyboards and the frantic tapping of keypads. Donovan didn't need to see their faces to know fear had seized every scientist on the other side. The lights flickered once, then steadied, but the brightness was wrong, too soft, too diffuse, as though the illumination were no longer coming from the ceiling panels, but bending around Oreth's presence instead. The being did not move. It didn't even shift its gaze. Yet every screen in the observation room behind Donovan erupted into cascading lines of symbols that shouldn't exist, characters twisting into configurations that overwhelmed every operating system instantly. Alarms engaged, but only for a heartbeat before sputtering out into a flat, suffocated silence. The emergency lockdown sequence triggered next. Donovan could feel the vibration of the security doors preparing to seal, the heavy mechanical latches grinding into motion. But before the doors could even slide a fraction inward, the entire system died. Not gradually, not through a power shortage. Everything simply stopped. Panels dimmed. Motors froze. The reinforced blast doors remained suspended mid-command, helpless, as if some invisible presence had wrapped around the facility's infrastructure and pinched every electrical vein shut. Donovan stared at the being in front of him, the luminous lines within Oreth's form shifting like currents of cosmic water. The being made no gesture, no indication it was even aware of NASA's systems. Yet, the truth pressed into Donovan's thoughts with unmistakable clarity. Oreth was not hacking into anything. Oreth was overriding it by existing. His consciousness radiated an influence that bypassed matter itself, touching circuits, power grids, locking mechanisms, and communication networks the way a human might brush a hand through fog. Behind the glass, chaos erupted. Scientists scrambled with manual overrides, shouting instructions that contradicted one another. They attempted to kill the power entirely, switching the facility to offline mode, but even the fail-safes refused to obey. Backup generators initiated themselves without human input, screens rebooted into unfamiliar interfaces, and the security feeds began displaying distorted images that flickered between the chamber and something else, something vast, dark, and layered with distant glimmers of light, like stars glimpsed through a shattered lens. Donovan felt a strange tug in the back of his mind, a sensation that the chamber suddenly existed in two places at once. Oreth's form brightened briefly, casting a long shadow that stretched across the metallic floor. It did not speak, yet Donovan sensed a message forming, something the being intended to transmit through thought alone. Outside, technicians attempted to seal off the hallway leading to the chamber, but every mechanism failed, every sensor flatlined, every system bowed beneath an influence that was not hostile, but absolute. Once again, Oreth's presence shifted, and with it the entire facility seemed to breathe a single, unified contraction that rippled through walls, floors, wires, and minds alike. Donovan realized the truth with a cold, sinking certainty. NASA's decades of security, its layers of secrecy, its hidden levels and classified wings, all existed under the assumption that the greatest threat would be physical. But Oreth was not bound by physical laws. Containment was an idea humans had invented, and Oreth had just shown how meaningless that idea truly was. The chamber settled into an unnatural quiet, the kind of silence that did not simply fill a room but replaced the air entirely. The hum of machines, the alarms, the frantic voices beyond the glass, all of it had vanished, leaving Donovan standing in a stillness so absolute it felt as if time itself had paused to listen. Oreth's presence hovered before him, tall and luminous, his form rippling with layered currents of light that shifted like starlight passing through deep water. Donovan felt a faint tremor behind his eyes, a subtle pressure that signaled the beginning of a message not spoken with sound, but woven directly into the fabric of consciousness. The first fragments of thought arrived like distant echoes, drifting into his mind with deliberate weight. The sensation was neither invasive nor gentle. It was more like the opening of a door he had never known existed. Oreth's presence grew brighter, and with that brightness came a vision faint at first, like a reflection glimpsed on the surface of a turning mirror. Donovan saw shapes, patterns, spirals of color stretching across what felt like impossible distances. He sensed movement, not through space, but through cycles, through epochs, measured not in years, but in cosmic rhythms older than the Earth itself. Then the message formed fully, settling into his awareness with chilling clarity. Earth was approaching a cosmic event, one vast enough to reshape the planet, not through impact or explosion, but through alignment and astronomical convergence that activated a force few civilizations had ever survived. Donovan felt the weight of the revelation sink into him, not as fear, but as a truth too large to comprehend in a single breath. Oreth's consciousness pressed gently, guiding his understanding with precision. The event was not random. It was not unique. It had happened before. What unsettled Donovan most was the realization that this was not a warning of destruction. It was a warning of repetition. Imagery poured into his mind in fragments. He saw ancient worlds, civilizations older than any human record, each one reaching a certain threshold of development before being swallowed by the same cosmic convergence Earth was now approaching. Some attempted to escape it, some attempted to fight it. None succeeded. Yet Orith's tone carried no malice, no triumph, only a somber patience, as if this truth had waited millennia for someone capable of hearing it. Another layer of understanding followed, more unsettling than the last. NASA had known something was coming. For decades, their deepest classified divisions had studied signals and anomalies related to this event. They had misinterpreted the signs, believing the convergence was a threat, a destructive force targeted at Earth. Their fear had shaped every decision, every sealed chamber, every hidden experiment. But fear had led them to the wrong conclusion. Orith allowed the realization to take form inside Donovan's mind. The cosmic event was not a weapon. It was not an attack. It was a cycle, a natural rhythm of the universe that civilizations encountered when they reached a certain level of awareness, a test of resilience, not a sentence of extinction. Yet humanity stood at its threshold without understanding its nature, reacting with panic, secrecy, and desperation. NASA's efforts to contain the artifact, to decode its warnings through force and analysis, had only deepened their misunderstanding. Donovan felt a tide of cold unease rise within him. The event was approaching faster than anyone realized. The signs were increasing, accelerating, converging on a timeline that no human institution had prepared for. And Orith's presence pulsed with an urgency that was impossible to ignore. The vision faded slowly, leaving only the chamber's dim light and Orith's tall, shimmering silhouette. The silence that followed felt heavy, as though the air itself understood the gravity of what had been revealed. Donovan stood motionless, the weight of ancient civilizations pressing against his thoughts, the echo of Orith's warning settling into the deepest corners of his mind. Earth was not in danger because of what was coming. Earth was in danger because it did not understand it, and the clock had already begun counting down. The corridor leading to the forbidden vault felt older than the rest of the underground compound, as if the walls themselves remembered secrets no one had spoken aloud in generations. The air grew denser the farther Donovan walked, carrying a faint metallic scent that suggested the presence of outdated machinery long since disconnected from any official power grid. His escort remained silent, guiding him through a sequence of biometric doors that opened not with the hum of modern systems, but with the slow, reluctant groan of mechanisms that had not been used in years. Each threshold seemed to peel back another layer of history NASA had taken great care to conceal. When the final door sealed behind him, Donovan found himself standing in a room unlike any part of the facility he had seen before. It resembled an archive, but not one meant for public record or internal use. This vault was structured like a mausoleum for the things NASA hoped the world would forget. Rows of reinforced drawers lined the walls, each marked only with a sequence of numbers that meant nothing to the uninitiated. A faint blue glow emanated from a recessed ceiling panel, casting long shadows between the shelves and creating the impression that the room extended far deeper than it physically could. At the far end of the chamber lay a table cluttered with sealed evidence containers. Donovan approached, and the sight of the first label sent a pulse of cold recognition through him. It referenced a mission number that officially did not exist, attached to an astronaut crew that had never been acknowledged in any NASA history. Yet Donovan knew the handwriting on the report. It belonged to a colleague who had disappeared from the roster without explanation more than 20 years earlier. The folder contained transcripts of testimonies that had been erased from every digital archive, each one describing encounters with signals that seemed to originate from outside the three-dimensional framework humans understood as space. Other containers held more chilling artifacts, black box data retrieved from missions publicly declared failed launches, though the recovered readings told a different story. Some missions had made it far beyond their intended trajectory, encountering anomalies that warped navigation systems and scrambled neural function in ways conventional physics could not explain. Donovan skimmed through one transcript describing a crew who reported hearing voices in the static of deep space transmissions. Voices speaking in patterns that no language software could decode, but that induced profound emotional responses in every astronaut exposed to them. The farther he read, the more the vault revealed. There were sealed video logs flagged with red warnings, their contents restricted to clearance levels above anything Donovan ever held. One recording showed a spacecraft drifting silently, its crew missing though their life support systems remained active. Another displayed an image captured beyond the orbit of Pluto, an impossible geometric formation suspended in the void, shifting in ways that defied dimensional logic. The timestamp on the footage preceded the oldest known data from the artifact by nearly a decade. A pattern began emerging in Donovan's mind, a thread connecting each vanished mission, each suppressed testimony, each erased report. NASA had not stumbled blindly into contact with the unknown. They had encountered signs long before the artifact surfaced, whispers from the depths of space, anomalies that hinted at a presence watching humanity's rise with ancient patience. Missions had been launched to investigate. Some returned fractured. Some never returned at all. And every trace of them had been buried in this vault, hidden from the world, to avoid panic, to avoid questions, to avoid acknowledging that the universe was not silent and humanity was not alone. Donovan placed his hand on the last container, feeling the weight of decades concealed beneath layers of secrecy. He understood now why he had been summoned, why Aurith had awakened, why the warnings were intensifying. NASA had feared the unknown for so long that they had smothered every sign of it, choosing secrecy over understanding. But the cosmic event approaching Earth did not care about buried missions or forgotten truths. It was coming all the same. And everything in this vault was merely the beginning of a much larger revelation the world was unprepared to face. The chamber dimmed as Aurith's presence shifted, and Donovan felt a subtle pull ripple through the air, as if unseen currents were gathering around them. The metallic walls faded into a soft haze, and for a moment he wondered if the artifact had reactivated. But this was not light expanding into geometry. This was something far older, something that pressed against the edges of his consciousness like a tide preparing to break. Aurith's form brightened, the auroral currents within his translucent frame swirling in deliberate spirals that resonated with a deep, ancient rhythm. Donovan sensed the beginning of another transmission, one not meant for the ears, but for the very fabric of memory. The chamber dissolved entirely. What replaced it was a vast darkness, not empty, but heavy, textured with distant echoes that flickered like embers suspended in a void. Donovan stood within this darkness, without feeling ground beneath his feet, yet he did not fall. Aurith's presence hovered beside him, a luminous constant amid the shifting shadows. Then a pulse of light expanded outward, revealing an immense landscape that emerged as though it had been waiting in silence for countless ages. Donovan saw an Earth he did not recognize, continents shaped differently, oceans stretching into unfamiliar boundaries. Not prehistoric, not primordial, something else. A world with cities made of crystalline structures rising from coastlines long erased from any map. Towers spiraled like braided light, their surfaces humming with energy that pulsed in harmony with the sky. He watched people, humans, yet subtly different, moving through streets illuminated by technologies that blended seamlessly with nature. These civilizations were not primitive. They were not myth. They were advanced in ways modern humanity could not yet imagine, their achievements woven from science that understood consciousness as deeply as physics. Aurith did not speak, yet Donovan felt the being's thoughts guiding the vision. This was not imagination. This was memory, Earth's own memory. Another pulse of light washed over the scene, and the civilization shifted into the next epoch. New structures rose, constructed from metals that reflected starlight even at midday. Vast observatories the size of mountains watched the skies with precision far beyond modern instruments. Written language shimmered in fractal patterns across floating tablets. Humanity had reached heights of knowledge that modern history books could not fathom. Yet this era, too, was unfamiliar. No ruins of these cities remained, no artifacts, no stories. As if time itself had wiped them clean. Donovan felt a growing unease as the vision continued. The next civilization rose in the desert of what would one day become barren plains. They harnessed energy directly from the magnetic field, shaping the sky with structures that bent auroras into ribbons of controlled light. Their understanding of the cosmos surpassed even the scientists of Donovan's era. They charted dimensional anomalies, predicted celestial rhythms, and communicated with frequencies that carried thought across continents. Then the light flickered. The sky darkened. A strange vibration passed through the landscape, distorting everything as though reality itself were warping. Donovan felt the shift in the core of his being. The cosmic event Orith had warned him about. Not destruction, transformation. A convergence of forces that struck, not with impact, but with resonance, unmaking the architecture of civilization. Scattering knowledge, unraveling memory, leaving only fragments that would erode into legend. One by one, he watched each epoch collapse. Not through war, not through plague, not through the arrogance of human downfall, but through the same cosmic rhythm, an event that reset the planet's evolution every time humanity reached a certain threshold of awareness. Each time they survived, but not intact. Their knowledge dissolved. Their cities vanished. Their history was swallowed by an earth that healed itself by forgetting. The darkness shifted again, revealing humanity starting over. Simple shelters, basic tools, and above them, a sky unchanged, indifferent, holding the memory of countless civilizations beneath its stars. Donovan felt a deep ache, a sorrow he could not express. Humanity had never been young. Humanity had been amnesic. Oreth's presence pulsed gently beside him, urging understanding. The cosmic event was not meant to erase. It was meant to reset, forcing civilizations to rebuild stronger, wiser, more attuned to the universal cycles. But each time, fear had replaced understanding, and humanity forgot the warning before it could learn the lesson. The darkness folded in on itself, and the chamber slowly came back into view. Donovan exhaled shakily, realizing he had been holding his breath. The air felt different now, heavier with the weight of epochs erased, civilizations lost, and truths buried beneath the fragile surface of human memory. Earth had lived more lives than anyone knew, and the next convergence was coming. The chamber trembled faintly as Oreth's presence shifted once more, and Donovan sensed the atmosphere around him tightening, as if the room itself braced for a revelation it was never built to contain. The light surrounding Oreth softened into a pale, pulsating glow, less intense than before but far more focused, like the calm center of a storm preparing to reveal its eye. Donovan felt the first brush of the message forming before a single image appeared, a pressure deep within his consciousness, subtle yet immense, as though something vast was leaning close enough for him to feel its breath on the edges of thought. Then the vision unfolded. The metallic chamber dissolved into a cosmic expanse, a boundless ocean of darkness through which distant stars flickered like the faint, dying embers of ancient fires. But the space before him was not empty. Something moved through it slow, deliberate, and unimaginably large. Donovan could not see its form in any earthly sense. It had no edges, no borders, no surface. It appeared instead as a shifting field of luminous currents, folding and unfurling like a tide made of consciousness itself. Color rippled through it in patterns that suggested thought rather than light. It was not an object, it was not a force, it was awareness. Oreth allowed the vision to expand, revealing its immense scale. The field drifted between star systems the way a cloud might drift between mountain tops, unaffected by gravity, distance, or vacuum. It moved with purpose, guided not by physics but by something older, something fundamental that lay beneath the structure of reality. For a moment, Donovan sensed the edge of its presence brushing against him, and an overwhelming wave of emotion surged through him: curiosity, recognition, memory of something he had never experienced. The sensation was so profound he staggered, struggling to breathe in a space that was not physical. The message crystallized in his mind with perfect clarity. This field was approaching Earth, but not as a threat. It was part of a cosmic cycle, a phenomenon as natural as the slow drift of galaxies and as ancient as the birth of the first star. It carried no malice, no intention to harm. Its purpose was transformation, an awakening of latent consciousness in civilizations that had reached a threshold of awareness, a universal recalibration, a moment when the boundaries of perception widened and species were pushed into a higher understanding of themselves and of the cosmos. Humanity had encountered this field before, countless ages ago, during the epochs Orith had shown him. Each time, the result had been profound but destructive only to the old ways of perceiving reality. Civilizations that accepted the transformation evolved into something greater. Civilizations that resisted were shattered by their own fear, their own attempts to contain or fight what could never be stopped. Then the vision shifted sharply, showing Donovan a series of scenes that left a cold numbness spreading through him. NASA had detected fragments of the approaching field years earlier, long before the artifact resurfaced. Unidentified anomalies in deep space readings, patterns that defied electromagnetic classification, signals that carried no language but triggered inexplicable emotional reactions in analysts who studied them. Rather than recognizing the signs, NASA interpreted them through the narrow lens of human fear. They labeled them as potential threats, coded them under defense protocols, and hid every trace from the public. As the field drew closer, the readings grew more intense. Sensitive instruments began to malfunction. Satellites recorded distortions in ways that mimicked interference but carried precise, repeating structures. Instead of seeing these patterns as communication, NASA classified them as hostile signatures. They prepared for invasion. Orith's presence pulsed with a sorrow that resonated through Donovan's thoughts like a mournful ripple. Humanity was facing a moment of transformation older than any civilization on Earth. Yet its most powerful institutions were preparing to resist it with weapons, fear, and desperation. The cosmic field did not invade. It did not conquer. It simply arrived, offering evolution to those ready, and dissolution to those who fought blindly against what they did not understand. The vision dimmed, leaving Donovan standing once more in the metallic chamber. Orith's form flickered softly, as if the effort of revealing such truth strained even his projected consciousness. Donovan felt the weight of the revelation settle into him like a cold stone in water. The phenomenon was coming. Humanity had misread it completely, and the countdown to its arrival had already begun. The weight of Orith's revelation lingered in Donovan's mind long after the vision faded, settling into him with a cold heaviness that refused to dissolve. The chamber's metallic walls reformed around him, solid once again, yet they felt smaller now, as though they were attempting to contain something far too vast for any human structure to confine. Orith's luminous form dimmed to a steady, watchful glow, giving Donovan a moment to gather himself before the next truth pressed forward. He already sensed the direction it was heading, but the depth of it he was not prepared for that. The lights outside the chamber flickered, and faint echoes of distant machinery rumbled through the underground corridors. Somewhere in the facility above them, NASA's upper command was mobilizing. Donovan could sense the shift, even from here, the restless hum of urgency rippling through the structure like a spreading tremor. Orith's presence brightened slightly, an unspoken cue for Donovan to follow. The door slid open with a quiet groan, and Donovan stepped back into the hallway. The scientists, watching from behind the observation glass, wore expressions of tightly controlled fear, their eyes darting between monitors, flooding with red alerts and data streams they could no longer interpret. A supervisor barked commands into a handheld device, but every system displayed the same status: interference growing, anomalies increasing, unidentified cosmic signatures approaching at accelerating rates. Donovan recognized the screens instantly. He had worked with similar systems during his years in the agency deep space threat assessment platforms designed during the earliest days of global defense planning. They were never intended for natural cosmic phenomena. They had been created for war. Layers of protocol flashed across the displays. High-grade military encryption, defense network integrations, automatic escalation triggers. It took Donovan only a moment to understand what NASA believed was happening. They had mistaken the approaching consciousness field for an invasion, and the protocols they were now activating were born from this misunderstanding. These were not research systems. These were weapons systems distributed across satellites, ground stations, classified orbital platforms, and atmospheric intercept networks spanning nearly every allied nation on the planet. And the more the phenomenon pressed closer to Earth, the more aggressively the systems began to respond. Donovan felt a cold shiver crawl beneath his skin. NASA had built their defenses on the assumption that any unknown signal arriving from deep space must be hostile. Over decades, fear had shaped policy more than science. Those fears had been buried behind layers of secrecy and bureaucracy, invisible to the public, invisible even to most of NASA itself. But now, faced with the phenomenon Orith had revealed, those buried fears were being activated all at once, and the consequences could be catastrophic. Orith's thoughts brushed gently against his mind, guiding Donovan toward understanding the full scope. These defense networks were not simply monitoring the cosmic field. They were preparing to respond, and the response, by design, was entirely automated once specific threat thresholds were reached. The closer the field came, the more these thresholds were triggered. Within hours, perhaps minutes, global defense systems would initiate countermeasures intended to repel an extraterrestrial force. But the consciousness field was not something that could be repelled. It was not an entity. It did not react to force. It permeated reality itself, passing through matter, energy, and consciousness without resistance. Any attempt to attack it, or worse, any attempt to use high-energy weapons during its arrival, could destabilize the field as it merged with Earth's electromagnetic environment. The result would not be containment. It would be planetary devastation. Donovan felt the truth settle in with chilling clarity. Humanity stood on the brink of triggering its own destruction, not because of the approaching phenomenon, but because of its fear of the unknown. NASA's misinterpretation had set in motion a sequence that could not simply be canceled. Systems were already transitioning into readiness states. Military satellites were shifting orbits. Atmospheric defense grids were charging. Nations were being alerted through secure channels, unaware that the threat was not a threat at all. Oreth's voice entered Donovan's mind again, softer this time, but carrying an urgency that pressed against every thought. The cosmic field would arrive soon. The defenses must not activate. Humanity's survival depended not on fighting the phenomenon, but on understanding it. Donovan realized with a sinking certainty that he was now the only bridge between the truth and the mistake that could end everything. And time was slipping away. The air in the chamber shifted once more, carrying an almost imperceptible tremor that brushed against Donovan's consciousness like a distant voice carried on a cosmic wind. Oreth's luminous form flickered, the swirling currents within his translucent body rearranging into patterns that suggested deep contemplation. Donovan felt the beginning of another revelation pressing into his awareness. Slow at first, then gathering momentum like a tide rising beyond the horizon. The metallic room around them dimmed again, but this time the darkness came not from the absence of light, but from the presence of something larger, attempting to make itself known. The vision returned in a gentle wave, less violent than before, yet infinitely deeper. It opened like a lens, revealing not a place, but a structure, an arrangement of energy woven across the galaxy in a pattern so vast Donovan could barely comprehend it. It appeared as interconnected streams of radiant filaments stretching between stars like luminous threads in a cosmic tapestry. They pulsed with rhythmic intervals, sending waves of resonance through the void, each pulse carrying information that shimmered with intelligence. Donovan recognized it immediately, not because he had seen it before, but because the understanding rose within him as if it had always been there, buried deep and waiting to be stirred. This was the phenomenon approaching Earth. Not a cloud, not a wave, not a force, but a network, an ancient galactic matrix that connected worlds capable of awakening to higher states of consciousness. It was a design so intricate, so purposeful, that no natural phenomenon could have created it by chance. Orith's thoughts moved gently through Donovan's mind, guiding his understanding without overwhelming him. This network was a communication system, but not one defined by language, symbols, or electromagnetic frequencies. It was a medium that transmitted awareness itself. Advanced civilizations did not send messages across the galaxy. They transmitted states of being. They shared knowledge, memory, intuition, and enlightenment through shifts in consciousness that rippled across this ancient field. The approaching phenomenon was one of these waves, an awakening cycle that passed through regions of the galaxy at intervals spanning hundreds of thousands of years. Orith revealed another layer of truth. When a developing species reached a threshold of cognitive evolution, when curiosity outweighed fear, when awareness deepened, when consciousness expanded enough to resonate, the field responded, amplifying dormant abilities and unlocking potentials that had always been present but had lain silent. It did not impose change. It activated what was already there: psychic intuition, heightened perception, multidimensional awareness abilities ancient civilizations once possessed before previous cosmic resets erased them. Donovan felt the weight of that realization settle in. Humanity had always sensed glimpses of these abilities, flashes of insight, intuition that defied logic, dreams that revealed truths, connections that transcended distance. These were not anomalies. They were remnants, echoes of what humans once were before the last cosmic cycle reset their evolution. The approaching field sought not to invade, but to restore, to reignite what had been lost. But then the vision shifted, showing how the network interacted with different worlds. Some civilizations welcomed the resonance and evolved into forms of existence far beyond physical limitations. Others resisted, fearing the transformation, interpreting the wave as an attack. Those worlds fractured. Their resistance destabilized the resonance, causing catastrophic consequences, not because the field was destructive, but because fear warped the very process meant to awaken them. Donovan understood now why Orith had come. Humanity was on the edge of its next awakening, yet its institutions, especially NASA's classified divisions, had misread the signals as hostile. Their preparation to counter the phenomenon risked disrupting the resonance at the moment of arrival, and that disruption could unravel the field's stabilizing effect, triggering the very destruction they believed they were preventing. Orith's presence pulsed with a solemn certainty. The field was not coming for Earth. It was coming for all species that had reached the threshold. It was a call to step forward into a broader cosmic community, a chance for humanity to rediscover its forgotten heritage. The chamber around them gradually returned, but the sense of vastness lingered in Donovan's mind, echoing like the final note of a long-forgotten melody. The truth was now unmistakable. The signal was never a threat. It was an invitation, and humanity was not ready to receive it. The moment Donovan felt Orith's presence lean closer, The chamber air thickened into something almost tangible, as if the space around him had become a membrane stretched thin by an unseen force. The lights dimmed again, but not because of a power fluctuation this time. Darkness gathered around him the way ink spreads through water, soft and deliberate, until the metallic walls blurred and dissolved as though they had never existed. Orith's form brightened within that dissolving space, but not merely with light. Something deeper radiated from him, an invitation, a threshold, a doorway into a realm Donovan had no words for. He sensed what was coming before Orith initiated it. Emerging, not of bodies or thoughts in any physical sense, but of consciousness, an overlap of awareness that pressed against Donovan's mind with a gentleness so profound it felt like the touch of ancient memory brushing against the surface of who he was. Orith did not force the connection. He let Donovan feel it, recognize it, accept it, and when Donovan did, the merge began. The first sensation was expansion. His awareness stretched outward, unfolding like a map that had been kept tightly rolled for a lifetime. The chamber vanished completely, replaced by a boundless darkness threaded with luminous currents that flowed like rivers of starlight. Each current carried meaning, memory, history, identity. Donovan was no longer observing Orith's consciousness from the outside. He was inside it, moving through layered strata of perception so vast they felt geological, as if he were traversing the bedrock of a mind older than civilizations. Images surged around him, not linear, not sequential, more like fragments of a mosaic that assembled itself only as he allowed it. He witnessed memories from worlds with skies tinted violet and oceans of reflective silver. Civilizations composed of beings who communicated through harmonics rather than speech, whose cities grew like living organisms shaped by collective thought. He felt the presence of societies that existed not in physical structures, but in networks of consciousness woven through crystalline matrices. These were not visions given to impress him. They were lived experiences, Orith's own memories, shared without filter. Donovan felt himself pulled deeper, descending into epochs that predated even the earliest civilizations Orith had shown him before. He saw the construction of enormous galactic structures, rings of energy spanning light years, gateways that connected distant star systems through channels that manipulated the fabric of higher dimensions. He sensed the minds responsible for creating these structures, their intelligence so immense it bent space around their presence the way gravity bends light. These beings were not gods. They were ancestors of cosmic exploration, pioneers of consciousness who forged pathways across the galaxy long before humanity existed. The merge deepened. Now Donovan felt not just memories, but comprehension. Knowledge poured into him, not as information, but as knowing an immediate grasp of concepts he could never have learned through study. He understood the architecture of reality as Orith perceived it. Layers of existence interwoven like strands of a multidimensional tapestry, each layer influencing the others through subtle harmonics. Reality was not a solid construct. It was a resonance, a song, a field of frequencies shaped by consciousness at every scale. He saw the cosmic communication network again, but this time from within. He felt the pulse of the approaching consciousness field. He sensed how civilizations tuned themselves to its rhythm, how they awakened dormant abilities by aligning thought and perception with the network's frequency. The field was not merely passing through the galaxy. It was interacting with it, restoring memory, reconnecting species that had drifted too far into isolation. Then the merge shifted abruptly. Donovan experienced fragments of Earth's forgotten epochs through Orith's perspective, the rise and fall of civilizations wiped clean by cosmic resets, the resilience of humanity as it rebuilt from ashes again and again. He saw Orith observing these cycles, not as an intruder, but as a guardian documenting the long evolution of a species destined for awakening. Orith had witnessed Earth's story many times, and now Donovan felt the weight of that stewardship pressing into his own thoughts. The merge began to retract, slowly, gently, allowing Donovan's consciousness to return to the boundaries of his own mind. But something remained, an imprint, a resonance, a faint echo of the vastness he had touched. The chamber reassembled around him, materializing like a fading dream knitting itself back into the waking world. Orith's form dimmed to a more familiar glow, yet the connection between them lingered, an unspoken understanding now woven into Donovan's identity. He breathed in, realizing he had just glimpsed the deeper architecture of reality. And now, he could never go back to who he had been before. The chamber felt impossibly quiet after the mind merge, as if even the air feared disturbing the echo of what Donovan had just witnessed. His senses remained expanded, lingering at the edges of a perception far wider than his human form had ever held. Orith's luminous figure dimmed to a steady glow, but Donovan sensed a new openness within the being, a readiness to unveil a truth deeper and older than anything he had been shown. A faint hum rippled across the room, not from machinery, but from the resonance between their two minds, still linked, still attuned. The next revelation came not as a vision, but as a slow, deliberate unveiling of memory older than Earth's recorded history. The chamber dissolved once again, replaced by a landscape that looked both alien and eerily familiar. Donovan recognized the curvature of Earth's horizon, the shimmer of its early atmosphere. But the world he saw was young, untouched by civilization, shaped only by forests, oceans, and the quiet breathing of a planet still forming its identity. From the sky descended a faint shimmer, not a craft, not an object, but a distortion of space that rippled like heat over water. It touched the ground in silence and unfolded into presence, beings shaped of light, slender and tall, more energy than matter. Orith's ancient kin. Donovan felt their perspective before he saw their actions. They observed early humans, not with superiority or intention to dominate, but with fascination, curiosity, and a profound respect for the species emerging in the cradle of the world. These early humans were primitive, their thoughts small sparks flickering in the darkness of an unawakened mind. But within them lay something rare, potential, a latent resonance, a seed of consciousness capable of aligning with the great galactic network. The truth crystallized slowly, gently. Humanity had not been engineered. No genetic manipulation, no forced evolution. The visitors had never reshaped human biology. They had simply nudged the species forward at critical moments, subtle, quiet influences that allowed the sparks of awareness to grow. Dreams whispered into the minds of early shamans. Insights offered to wandering thinkers who gazed too long at the stars. Gentle impulses that guided humanity toward reflection, imagination, community, and eventually language. Not commanding, not controlling, encouraging. Orith shared memories of standing invisible at the edges of ancient gatherings, where early humans traced symbols in the dirt, shaped rudimentary tools, or told the first stories around fires. The visitors watched, always leaving choices intact. When tribes faced extinction, they offered intuition, whispering the idea of migration or the notion of storing food. When early civilizations emerged, they sent dreams of structure, balance, and cooperation, never dictating, only guiding. Donovan saw their influence woven throughout humanity's forgotten epochs, moments when leaps in knowledge seemed inexplicable, discoveries that arrived too suddenly, as though the world had inhaled inspiration from an unseen source. The visitors had seeded possibilities, nothing more. The growth had always been humanity's own. Orith's thoughts pressed into Donovan's awareness with gentle certainty. The visitors believed humanity possessed a rare alignment, a consciousness capable of integrating rational understanding with intuitive depth. A species, able to merge physical existence with higher perception, allowing it one day to communicate naturally through the galactic network. But cycles of cosmic resets had broken humanity's memory again and again. Civilizations rose, reached the threshold, and fell when the cosmic field arrived. The visitors had watched each cycle with sorrow, knowing they could not intervene. The field was a universal process, not a force they controlled. All they could do was help the species rise again after each collapse, nurturing the fragile spark of consciousness that persisted despite the resets. The vision drifted through ages, humanity painting its earliest symbols on cave walls, unaware that the act of marking meaning onto stone was the first step toward cosmic communication. Ancient astronomers mapping stars with an instinct that seemed too advanced for their era. Mystics, speaking of unity, oneness, and hidden realms, without understanding where the knowledge came from. The visitors had walked alongside them in silence, unseen guardians of a species destined for awakening. As the chamber reformed around Donovan, the realization settled into him with both awe and weight. Humanity had never been alone, but it had never been controlled. Its journey had been its own, guided gently by watchers who believed in the species' potential to join the cosmic chorus. Orith's presence pulsed softly, a final thread of truth weaving into Donovan's thoughts. Humanity was not a mistake of evolution, nor a lesser species stumbling in an indifferent universe. It was a young consciousness, nurtured with patience, rising through cycles of forgetting and remembering. And now, for the first time in many lifetimes, it stood on the edge of remembering again. The origins of humanity were not defined by intervention but by potential. And that potential was about to be tested by the approaching cosmic awakening. The chamber darkened once more, but unlike the previous transitions, this shift carried a heaviness that felt distinctly human. The air thickened with the scent of old circuitry and static, the atmosphere charged as if haunted by memories that did not belong to Donovan alone. Orith's glow dimmed until he became little more than a silhouette threaded with starlight. Then, with a slow pulse that rippled through the room like a heartbeat echoing through metal, the vision began to form. This time, Donovan did not find himself in some distant epoch or cosmic expanse. Instead, the darkness sharpened into a grainy black and white image, the kind produced by old analog cameras strapped to spacecraft hulls in the earliest decades of human spaceflight. The footage floated before him as if projected onto the air itself, untouched by any device. Donovan recognized the format instantly: archival NASA telemetry video, the type classified so severely that only those embedded deep within the agency's shadow operations ever glimpsed it. The first clip opened with an astronaut drifting on a spacewalk, tethered to the spacecraft, the curve of Earth rising behind him in brilliant silence. His breathing echoed in the recording, slow at first, steady, professional. Then the man stiffened. His helmet turned sharply toward a point just beyond the frame. The audio crackled as he whispered something the microphone barely captured: astonishment, disbelief, fear. The camera jerked, struggling to stabilize as the astronaut reached out towards something unseen. Then the image flickered, distorted, and for a single frame Donovan saw it. A figure, humanoid in outline but composed of shimmering luminescence, drifting just beyond the spacecraft's hull. Not approaching, not threatening, simply observing. The footage cut abruptly. The next clip appeared before Donovan without warning. This one came from a later mission. He recognized the timestamp, though the mission itself never officially existed. An astronaut sat inside a capsule, speaking calmly into the recorder, detailing routine operations. Then his expression shifted. Confusion crept over his face. He checked his instruments, checked the time, checked again. The minutes did not add up. According to the timestamp, nearly 20 minutes had passed. But he remembered only seconds. His voice wavered as he tried to reconcile the gap. Around him, the cabin lights flickered with faint distortions, as if space itself had hiccuped. NASA scrubbed the mission logs. The astronaut disappeared from public life soon after. Another clip unfolded. This one clearer, more recent. A lunar orbiter captured an object hovering near the shadowed rim of the moon. The craft was small, angular, moving with precision no human-made vehicle could replicate. It pulsed with a faint energy signature that aligned with the cosmic field Orith had revealed earlier. The object drifted in silence, studying the orbiter, and then without acceleration, without motion, it vanished. Not by speed, by transition, as if it had stepped out of visible reality into another layer of existence. The footage should have ignited global hysteria. Instead, it had been sealed away, buried under layers of classification that few even knew existed. Another video emerged, this one so old its image fluttered like a candle flame. It showed astronauts on the far side of the moon. Their cameras pointed toward a ridge. Strange lights glided over the terrain, circular, soft, intelligent in their movements. The astronauts whispered frantically, their voices shaking with awe. They said they felt being watched, protected, warned. One of them mentioned seeing a tall figure standing at a distance, unmoving, luminous even in the vacuum of space. The recording ended with static, though Donovan sensed that static was not equipment failure but intentional erasure. Clip after clip appeared, encounters never acknowledged, anomalies never explained, disappearances folded into mission failures. Donovan felt his chest tighten as he realized how many astronauts had witnessed the same patterns. Beings observing them through spacecraft windows, distortions in time, lights that danced with awareness, presences that communicated through impression rather than sound. Oreth's thoughts drifted into Donovan's awareness, not as explanation, but as confirmation. These encounters were never hostile. They were guardianship, observations, invitations, subtle check-ins during humanity's earliest steps into the cosmic neighborhood. Yet NASA had buried them, terrified of admitting humanity was not alone and had never been alone. The final footage appeared like a whispered secret. A camera inside a lunar lander captured two astronauts asleep in zero gravity. A faint glow filled the cabin, soft and pulsing. A figure formed within it, tall, slender, luminous. It did not touch the astronauts. It only watched, its presence gentle, curious. Then it faded like a breath into darkness. NASA deleted the recording. The astronauts were told they had dreamed. As the chamber materialized once again, the weight of the buried encounters pressed into Donovan's mind. Humanity had been seen, guided, protected, not by conquerors, but by witnesses to its unfolding potential. And now, as the cosmic field approached Earth again, those buried truths were rising to the surface, whether humanity was ready to face them or not. The silence that settled after the final piece of suppressed footage faded was unlike any stillness Donovan had felt before. It was not emptiness. It was anticipation, a quiet holding of breath from something unseen, as though reality itself waited for him to process what came next. Oreth's form pulsed with a dim, steady radiance, the shifting auroral currents within him slowing into a calm rotation. Donovan sensed that they were crossing into a truth older and more intimate than buried missions or forgotten civilizations. This one lived inside him, inside every human who had ever existed. The chamber around them dissolved again, but this time the transition was gentler, like sinking into warm, dark water. Donovan felt himself suspended in a space that was neither physical nor abstract. It was something between thought and structure, a realm shaped by intention rather than matter. Glowing strands appeared in the darkness, thin filaments that twisted and spiraled like constellations woven into double helices. They rotated slowly, each strand shimmering with faint blue-white light, alive with encoded potential. Human DNA, but not as Donovan had ever seen it. Orith's thoughts touched his mind with a softness that carried the weight of millennia. These strands did not simply represent biology. They held memory, resonance, a blueprint not only for life, but for consciousness itself. Donovan saw sequences lighting up along the helix clusters of code that glowed like embers smoldering beneath ashes. Dormant, silent, waiting. Orith revealed the first truth with a pulse of light that traveled through the strands. Human DNA was incomplete, not in the sense of missing pieces, but in the way a seed is incomplete until the right conditions allow it to awaken. Those dormant sequences were not errors. They were locked chambers, timed vaults, hidden potentials designed to remain dormant until the species reached a point where awakening would not destroy it. Donovan drifted through the spiraling helix, watching the dormant codes pulse faintly, as if sensing the presence of the approaching cosmic field. He saw how humanity's earliest ancestors carried these sequences, how the sequences persisted through ages of collapse, disaster, and rebirth. The cosmic resets had stripped civilizations of memory, but the DNA carried its own record, written not in language, but in vibration, a whisper encoded into the structure of life itself. Orith guided Donovan deeper, revealing how the ancient visitors had never engineered humans. They had only enhanced the environment, the mental, emotional, and energetic landscape, to help the dormant sequences stabilize long enough to survive through generations. The code belonged to humanity. It had always belonged to humanity. The visitors only ensured the seed would not wither before it had the chance to bloom. Donovan saw flashes of potential encoded within the dormant strands: heightened intuition, multidimensional perception, expanded consciousness capable of interacting with the galactic network. Not powers, not mutations. Natural extensions of awareness capacities humanity had brushed against in dreams, visions, and unexplained moments of connection, but never fully accessed. Then, Orith revealed the most profound truth: these sequences responded to the cosmic consciousness field. Not to chemical signals or environmental conditions, but to resonance. The field acted as a key, a tuning frequency that caused the dormant segments to vibrate, unfold, and awaken. Once activated, they would not rewrite DNA, they would reveal DNA. The human form would remain the same, but human perception would expand so drastically that the species would no longer recognize itself. Donovan felt awe rising within him, mixed with dread. He saw how the approaching wave meant to awaken humanity could become catastrophic if met with fear and violent resistance. If global weapon systems fired into the field, if the activation was disrupted by shock, panic, or electromagnetic interference, the DNA sequences could misfire. Instead of awakening, they could destabilize. The human mind was fragile enough, even within its current limits. Forced activation under chaos could fracture consciousness on a mass scale. Orith's presence pulsed with a solemn urgency. The field was coming. Humanity was biologically prepared for it, spiritually aligned for it, but psychologically, technologically, and politically unready. The dormant code held the potential for a leap in evolution, unprecedented in Earth's history, but only if the species met the wave with openness, not resistance. The strands faded slowly, the chamber forming around Donovan again. He inhaled sharply, feeling the remnants of the vision lingering in his thoughts like an afterimage burned into the mind. Humanity had been carrying its next evolution for hundreds of thousands of years, a silent promise written in the language of life. And now that promise was stirring. The key was approaching, and time was running out. A quiet, trembling hum settled into the chamber, vibrating through Donovan's bones as if the air itself were beginning to anticipate what Orith was about to reveal. The glow surrounding the being sharpened, focusing into a thin, luminescent aura that outlined every movement like the halo of an eclipse. Donovan sensed the next truth rising, not as a vision this time, but as a tidal pressure behind his consciousness, an approaching inevitability, a cosmic drumbeat that grew louder with every moment. Then the room dissolved again, not into darkness, but into a horizon of swirling light. Donovan found himself suspended within a vast, luminous ocean, shimmering and shifting like the surface of a star. Waves of color folded through one another, each wave carrying a frequency he felt rather than heard. The sensation was not visual, it was experiential. The field, the cosmic consciousness wave approaching Earth. As he drifted within it, he understood something instinctually. This was not something that would simply pass by Earth. It was something Earth would pass through, like a planet entering a higher layer of reality, brushing against a frequency strong enough to stir every dormant potential within human consciousness. Oreth's presence appeared beside him, not as a figure but as a ripple of light moving in harmony with the field. The thoughts that entered Donovan's mind were clearer than anything spoken with words. When the wave reached Earth, billions would feel it. But not as fear, not as pain, as awakening. Donovan saw flashes of humanity during the event, everyday people standing in kitchens, sitting on buses, watching the night sky, or sleeping in their beds, suddenly experiencing the first tremors of expanded awareness. Their senses sharpening, their intuition blazing like a torch lit in the dark, their memories unraveling hidden threads, revealing things they had always known but had forgotten beneath layers of earthly conditioning. He saw minds awakening to truths that had lived inside them for lifetimes. Mothers sensing their children's emotions across great distances. Strangers feeling each other's thoughts in brief flashes of shared understanding. People recalling dreams that felt like messages, lives lived long before this one. Memories not of events, but of connection. Connection to the universe, to one another, to something indescribably ancient. This awakening was not mystical, it was evolutionary. The field resonated with dormant DNA sequences, lifting humanity's perceptual boundaries as naturally as dawn lifts the horizon. Donovan watched entire cities glow in the vision, shimmering with newly activated neural activity as billions of minds tuned themselves to energies they had never experienced. He saw people understanding truth without conversation, sensing intentions without being told, perceiving reality not as a series of disconnected events but as an interconnected tapestry pulsing with intelligent design. Telepathic resonance would not arrive as full conversations at first, but as impressions, a knowing, a shared pulse of emotion, a silent recognition of unity. Spiritual awareness would surge, not through religion, but through a visceral realization that consciousness was infinite, linked, and far older than the physical body. Oreth guided Donovan deeper, revealing another layer. The awakening would not be uniform. For some, it would arrive gently, like a whisper, reminding them of who they truly were. For others, it would arrive like a flood, overwhelming but transformative, breaking apart the illusions they had built their lives upon. A small percentage would resist, clinging to rigid beliefs or fear of losing the identity they had constructed. These individuals would experience confusion, disorientation, even panic as their perceptions expanded faster than their minds could adapt. But the field itself held no malice. It was not forcing change. It was revealing what was already present. Donovan saw humanity standing at a crossroads. The awakening would amplify empathy, intuition, creativity, and wisdom. It would dissolve the psychological walls humans had built between themselves, allowing a new era of cooperation, understanding, and global consciousness to emerge. Humanity would sense its unity as a species for the first time, but only if the transition was peaceful. If violence erupted, if fear dominated, if military systems fired into the field, disrupting its delicate resonance, the awakening could turn chaotic. Minds not prepared for abrupt expansion could fracture. Emotional waves could magnify into global instability. The field was safe, but the human reaction to it was the variable that could tip the world toward evolution or disaster. As the vision faded, Donovan found himself back in the chamber, his pulse racing, his thoughts scattering like sparks from a struck stone. Orith's presence steadied him with a soft, resonant pulse that echoed through his mind. The coming awakening was not a myth, not a prophecy, not an invasion. It was the moment humanity would meet its own potential. And the world had no idea it was only moments away. The chamber lights returned in a dim, wavering glow. But the room no longer felt like a place built by human hands. The air was denser, charged with the aftertaste of the visions Orith had given. Donovan visions of dormant DNA, trembling on the edge of activation, visions of humanity stepping across the threshold of a new consciousness. Donovan felt a lingering pressure in his mind. Not painful, but expansive. Like a door had opened somewhere behind his thoughts and refused to close. Orith's presence shimmered beside him, but the being remained silent. There was no need for words. The next truth was already rising, unspooling inside Donovan like a memory he had forgotten he carried. Yet the weight of this truth was heavier than any revelation before it. Not cosmic, not distant, human. The fear that gripped NASA did not come from the stars. It came from humanity itself. The chamber dissolved into a new vision, one not of ancient civilizations or distant galaxies, but of Earth in its present state. Donovan saw governments moving like vast, mechanical systems, rigid and self-preserving, operating through authority and the illusion of control. He saw intelligence agencies hoarding information the public never received, convinced that secrecy was safety. He saw institutions standing as pillars of stability, yet trembling behind the facade as the world grew more unpredictable. The vision sharpened. He found himself in a secure government briefing room, watching a group of military analysts, political strategists, and NASA officials reviewing classified data about the approaching cosmic field. Their expressions carried fear not of destruction, not of extraterrestrial threat, but of something far more destabilizing. They feared the collapse of control. Orith guided Donovan's understanding. When the consciousness field reached Earth, billions would awaken to deeper intuition. They would sense deception. They would recognize manipulation. They would feel the artificial structures shaping their lives. They would no longer tolerate lies, exploitation, or authoritarian systems disguised as security. Control would crumble not because of force, but because people would outgrow it. The vision expanded. Donovan saw individuals experiencing sudden clarity, realizing they had been living under constraints they never questioned. He saw workers quitting jobs designed to keep them exhausted, citizens ignoring leaders who relied on fear, communities forming without hierarchy, people acting not from obedience but from awareness. A world moving beyond institutions, beyond top-down systems, beyond the illusion that consciousness could be governed. NASA's terror came from understanding what awakened humans would become. Not rebels, not enemies. Beings who could no longer be controlled. Donovan watched officials discussing contingency plans. Their language was clinical, stripped of emotion, but the fear beneath it was unmistakable. They spoke of global order collapsing, of governments losing authority, of religious institutions losing influence, of military power becoming irrelevant in a world where consciousness itself had evolved past violence. They spoke of losing humanity not because humanity would change, but because it would slip beyond their grasp. Some argued for resisting the field at any cost. Others argued for suppressing the awakening, containing it, medicating it, countering it with digital noise and psychological manipulation. They feared billions of awakened minds thinking clearly for the first time, perceiving truth without filters, seeing through propaganda, illusions, and the narratives that kept societies compliant. Donovan felt a wave of cold realization wash through him. NASA did not fear extraterrestrial beings. They feared humans becoming aware of their own potential. They feared the end of institutional dominance. They feared a species that no longer needed guardians, governments, or gatekeepers to manage its understanding of reality. Orith's presence pulsed gently beside him, neither condemning nor pitying humanity's institutions. Only witnessing. Humans had built systems out of fear. Fear of chaos, fear of collapse, fear of the unknown. But awakening would dissolve the foundation those systems were built on. The vision shifted once more, showing Donovan an earth touched by the awakening field. People gathering, not in protest, but in recognition. Conversations blossoming without conflict. Entire communities sensing shared intentions without speaking. A species beginning to remember its unity. This was NASA's terror, not the field, not Orith, not extraterrestrial intervention, but the realization that consciousness once awakened cannot be governed, contained, or controlled. When the vision faded, Donovan stood in the dim chamber again, his breath unsteady. The truth settled over him with the force of a tidal wave. Humanity was not facing an invasion. Humanity was facing liberation, and those who depended on control would do anything to stop it. The chamber felt heavier than before, as though the very air had thickened in anticipation of something irreversible. The metallic walls glowed faintly, illuminated only by the soft radiance emanating from Orith's translucent form. Donovan sensed a shift in the being's presence, an energy that carried the weight of culmination, of something approaching its final, unavoidable threshold. Every revelation so far had expanded Donovan's understanding of humanity, of reality, of existence. But this moment felt different, personal, directed, final. The silence stretched long enough to feel intentional, as though Orith wanted Donovan to feel the gravity of what came next before it was spoken not through words, but through resonance. The being's light pulsed once, a slow, deliberate ripple that moved through the chamber and brushed against Donovan's consciousness like the prelude to a storm. Then the message began. It was not a vision this time, not a memory, not a cosmic panorama of ancient civilizations or luminous fields sweeping across galaxies. This transmission was focused sharp, precise, aimed directly at the core of Donovan's identity. For the first time, Orith was not showing him what was coming. He was telling him what must be done. Donovan felt the message unfold inside his mind like a branching structure of possibilities. Paths, outcomes, futures. Each one rippled outward from a single pivot point, his decision. Orith revealed the first path, and the chamber darkened around its edges as the scenario bloomed. If Donovan chose to reveal the truth, publicly broadcast the existence of the cosmic field, the dormant DNA activation, the hidden history of humanity, the suppressed encounters, he would ignite a firestorm. The world would fracture instantly. Governments would deny, then panic. Institutions built on control would tighten their grip. Religious authorities would declare heresy or salvation. Billions would awaken to terror instead of understanding. News networks would scramble to explain what they themselves did not grasp, spreading confusion instead of clarity. Social media would erupt with theories, wars of belief, fear spiraling into madness. Donovan saw cities convulsing with uncertainty, economies collapsing overnight, people torn between awe and dread. Those already near awakening would be overwhelmed, accelerating into states of perception they were not emotionally or mentally prepared to handle. The field would arrive to a world destabilized by fear, and the awakening meant to be harmonious could become chaotic, fragmented, possibly catastrophic. The vision dissolved, replaced by another. If Donovan chose silence, the world would continue forward unaware, drifting toward awakening without preparation. Millions would endure the transition smoothly, their intuition guiding them gently. But billions more, conditioned by fear, misinformation, trauma, and rigid belief, would be shaken by a shift they had no context for. Their awakening would not be chaotic, but destabilizing on a personal level. This path was gentler than the first, but still imperfect. Then Orith revealed the third path, quiet preparation. Not silence. Not disclosure. Guidance. Donovan saw himself becoming a conduit, a translator between humanity and the truth unfolding around it, whispering knowledge into the right minds at the right time, inspiring scientists to reconsider their models, nudging thinkers, mystics, educators, and leaders toward understanding, preparing communities subtly, without revealing the full scope, planting seeds of awareness, intuition, and unity so the collective consciousness would soften before the wave arrived. This path minimized fear, minimized resistance. It gave humanity a chance to awaken while still believing the transformation came from within, not from an external force. It preserved free will. It aligned with the cosmic field's purpose. Orith gently pressed the weight of the choice into Donovan's mind. Reveal everything and risk catastrophic panic. Say nothing and let billions awaken unprepared. Or walk the narrow path between them, quiet influence, subtle preparation. A single voice helping shape the consciousness of a species on the brink of transformation. Donovan felt the gravity of the decision settle into his bones. His pulse thudded in his ears, not from fear, but from the overwhelming awareness that his next action would alter the trajectory of the entire human species. Orith's presence softened, radiating neither pressure nor expectation. There was no command, no threat, only offering. Orith was not choosing for humanity. Orith was choosing Donovan. A faint tremor passed through the chamber, barely perceptible yet signaling that time was shortening. The cosmic field was drawing nearer. The window for preparation was shrinking. Donovan stood at the center of a crossroads older than history, holding a truth capable of reshaping the world. And Orith waited, silent and luminous, for the choice that only one human could make. The chamber's metallic walls still hummed faintly with the echo of Orith's offer when the outside world began to fracture. It happened subtly at first, small disturbances in a digital ecosystem that usually swallowed anomalies without notice. But Donovan sensed the ripple before he saw the evidence. A shift in the collective atmosphere, like static thickening before an approaching storm. Orith remained silent, though his presence pulsed with an awareness that told Donovan the unraveling had already begun. The first disruption appeared on satellite logs, encrypted, time-stamped, and then immediately flagged as corrupted by NASA's automated systems. But corruption was not the truth. The data packets that flickered in and out of the agency's servers contained images showing vast, shimmering distortions in the upper atmosphere. They looked like auroras, but they formed geometric shapes that no natural phenomenon could produce. Triangular lattices of pale blue light flickered above the Pacific, dissolving before ground-based instruments could capture them. Under normal circumstances, NSA intercept teams would have sealed the leak, but this time the data spread faster than containment protocols. A lone technician, frightened by what he saw, archived the anomaly off-site before the system purge initiated. Hours later, the images appeared on an obscure physics forum under an anonymous post. The files were low resolution, grainy, nearly impossible to authenticate, but the patterns were unmistakable. They matched the geometric resonances Donovan had seen circulating through the cosmic field. NASA responded by issuing a quiet network sweep, removing the images within minutes. But the purge triggered suspicion. Users reposted screenshots, backup files, encrypted copies. The harder NASA pushed, the faster the content multiplied. Then came the radiation spikes. Sensors across Europe and South America recorded sudden bursts of low-frequency radiation, soft enough not to be dangerous, but powerful enough to confuse atmospheric monitors. The signatures did not match solar activity, geomagnetic storms, nuclear tests, or cosmic rays. Agencies scrambled to write explanations, but internal reports leaked, first as rumors, then as classified documents uploaded anonymously to a whistleblower server hidden in the dark web. People began noticing strange behavior in the sky. Clouds forming perfect spirals, thin bands of auroral light gliding across horizons far from polar regions. A faint hum in the night air, recorded by dozens of phones. The sounds were subtle, like a distant choir made of frequencies too low for human ears, yet some people felt them in their bones as an inexplicable pressure, a sense that something enormous was stirring beyond the visible world. NASA tried to maintain control, issuing statements about atmospheric anomalies, instrument malfunctions, and misinterpretations of digital compression artifacts. But each explanation felt weaker than the last, especially when pilots reported luminous arcs forming at high altitudes, shimmering like ripples in clear water. Some swore they saw structures behind the light, vast and curved, but the images were always distorted, always incomplete. Then the whistleblowers moved. Anonymous accounts linked to former NASA engineers, contractors, and mission specialists began posting fragments of encrypted files, telemetry logs, partial video captures, sensor data overlays. None of it was complete, but the pattern was unmistakable. Hidden missions, redacted encounters, unexplained spatial distortions near the moon, audio transcripts of astronauts reporting flashes of light outside their windows moments before their communications mysteriously dropped. The leaks were too coordinated to be random, yet too chaotic to be orchestrated. It was as if fear had pushed people to speak at the same moment, a subconscious release of pressure before the world changed forever. NASA scrambled to plug the holes, but the cracks spread faster than the agency could respond. Journalists began to notice inconsistencies. Independent researchers compiled the leaked data, cross-referenced it with old anomalies, and built models that eerily resembled the luminous field Donovan had seen. Social media ignited with speculation, conspiracy, awe, terror. The narrative slipped from NASA's grasp like sand falling through trembling fingers. And through it all, Orith remained silent. His light pulsed with a calm understanding, as if he had expected the collapse of secrecy, as if this unraveling was not a failure, but a catalyst. Donovan sensed the truth settling over him with chilling clarity. The world was shifting, accelerating toward a revelation no institution could contain. The cover-up had begun to crumble not because of a mistake, but because humanity itself was sensing the approach of something vast. Something that would soon make secrecy impossible. The compound trembled with a low, resonant pulse that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The metallic walls quivered under the weight of an unseen force, their vibrations humming through the floor and rising slowly into the air, like the overture of an approaching storm. Donovan felt it before he understood it, a subtle tightening in his chest, a pull behind his eyes, a pressure in the air that made every hair on his arms lift in recognition. The cosmic field was drawing closer, brushing against Earth's outermost layers, whispering its presence across the fabric of the planet. Alarms blinked silently on control panels beyond the chamber. The lights flickered in stuttering, panicked patterns. Even the atmosphere in the hallway felt charged, filled with a restless static that moved like invisible wind. But none of it came from machines. None of it was electrical. It was consciousness grazing the edges of reality. Orith appeared without warning. Not through light, not through the artifact. He simply was, materializing into the chamber like a memory returning with perfect clarity. His form was brighter than before, shimmering layers of translucent geometry woven from colors beyond the visible spectrum. Donovan realized immediately that this was not the projection he had seen earlier. This was something closer to Orith's true self, compressed into a form human senses could interpret without shattering. The air bent around him, forming subtle waves that drifted outward like breath. Donovan felt those waves enter him gently, a calm spreading through his mind even as the facility descended into chaos. Orith's presence carried an ancient familiarity that sent a chill down Donovan's spine. This moment was not an accident, not an interruption. It was completion. Orith stepped forward, not physically, but through intention. His presence filled Donovan's field of awareness until the rest of the chamber dimmed like a fading dream. For a moment, Donovan felt suspended between worlds, anchored only by the pulse of his own heartbeat, echoing faintly in the void between them. Then Orith spoke. The words did not travel through the air. They resonated inside Donovan's mind, clear and overwhelming, vibrating through every thought, like a chime struck at the center of the soul. Humanity is about to remember everything. The chamber darkened further, reality flickering as if reacting to the truth spoken through Orith. Donovan felt a sudden rush of images, glimpses of prehistoric skies under forgotten civilizations, memories encoded in DNA, echoes from lives lived before recorded time. He sensed billions of dormant sequences stirring, dreams swelling beneath consciousness, the collective mind of humanity rising like a tide preparing to breach the shoreline. Orith's voice deepened, carrying an inevitability that made Donovan's breath falter. And nothing on Earth can stop what is coming. Donovan saw flashes of the cosmic field sweeping across Earth, soft, luminous, omnipresent. He saw people waking from sleep with tears they could not explain, remembering fragments of lifetimes they had never lived. He saw governments scrambling to maintain order, their structures crumbling beneath the weight of a truth too large to contain. He saw humanity standing at the edge of itself, the old world dissolving as the new one emerged, not from chaos, but from awakening. Orith's form brightened until the chamber dissolved completely, replaced by a vast expanse of white gold light. Donovan felt himself lifted into it, held in something that felt like memory, knowledge, and home all at once. For a moment, he sensed the consciousness of billions intertwined, a human species preparing to open its eyes for the first time. The light expanded, trembling with anticipation. Orith spoke his final words, not as a warning, but as a promise echoing across the threshold of a new age. The universe has waited long enough. The remembering begins now. And as the light surged outward, as the cosmic field touched the edge of Earth's atmosphere with a shiver of awakening, Donovan felt the world begin to change irrevocably, silently, magnificently. The finale had already begun.